Imagine standing in the dark. Not metaphorically, literally. The lights go out, the fan stops, the refrigerator goes silent. Outside, the streets of Havana are swallowed by blackness. This is not a power outage lasting a few hours. This has been going on for days. In some provinces, people are going without electricity for 20 hours at a stretch. And when they finally do get power back, they know it won't last. This is Cuba in 2024 and 2025, a country facing what many are quietly calling the worst crisis since the revolution itself. But here's the question that haunts every Cuban who lived through the early years, and every historian who has studied them. Was this always where it was heading? To understand what Cuba is today, you have to feel what Cuba was supposed to be. When Fidel Castro's rebels marched into Havana on January 8, 1959, the atmosphere was electric in a way no blackout could ever replicate. Batista's regime had been brutal, extractive, and deeply intertwined with American organized crime and corporate interests. The average Cuban worker had almost no safety net. Illiteracy was widespread in the countryside, and healthcare was essentially a privilege of the wealthy. So when a young, charismatic lawyer turned guerrilla stood before tens of thousands of cheering Cubans and promised to end all of that, to build a society where education was free, where doctors would reach every village, where the land would belong to those who worked it, people did not just cheer, they believed. And for a moment, the world believed with them. The early gains were real, and dismissing them would be dishonest. Cuba built one of the most impressive literacy campaigns in the Western Hemisphere in 1961, sending young volunteers into the mountains to teach farmers how to read. Life expectancy climbed. Infant mortality dropped to levels that rivaled wealthy nations. A small island with no oil, no massive industrial base, and surrounded by a powerful economic embargo managed to train doctors who were eventually sent to dozens of countries across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Even critics of the revolution struggled to argue with those numbers. And yet, if the revolution delivered so much, why are hundreds of thousands of Cubans choosing to leave? That question cuts to the core of what went wrong. And when you look closely, the mistakes were not all external. The revolution, over time, made choices that betrayed its own promises. The decision to build a one-party state that crushed political dissent. Jailing journalists, silencing poets, expelling gay men from universities in the 1960s and 70s was not the work of foreign pressure. That was a choice. The refusal to allow small private enterprise for decades, dismantling the very middle class that might have sustained the economy, was a choice. The over-reliance first on Soviet subsidies, and then, after the Soviet collapse, on Venezuelan oil, created a structural dependency that left the island catastrophically exposed every time a patron stumbled. When Venezuela's economy began to implode in the mid-2010s, Cuba felt it immediately. And the government's response, tightening controls, restricting information, arresting protesters, repeated every mistake in the same tired playbook. The July 2021 protests were a turning point that many outsiders missed. Thousands of Cubans took to the streets in cities across the island shouting "Patria y vida," homeland and life, a direct inversion of the revolution's old slogan. The government cracked down. Hundreds were arrested, some sentenced to more than 20 years in prison for the act of marching. But the image of ordinary Cubans, not Miami exiles, not CIA operatives, just exhausted, hungry people demanding change, traveled around the world and could not be unseen. And then, almost quietly, the exodus began again at a scale not seen since the 1980s. Between 2022 and 2024, more than 500,000 Cubans left for the United States alone. That is roughly 5% of the entire population in the span of 2 years. These are not just dissidents. These are doctors, engineers, teachers. The exact people the revolution spent 60 years training. This is where the geopolitical dimension becomes impossible to ignore. Because Cuba is not just an island in the Caribbean. It sits at the intersection of every major tension in the Western Hemisphere. And right now, those tensions are shifting in ways no one fully anticipated. Russia, cut off from much of the Western world following its invasion of Ukraine, has been quietly deepening its ties with Havana. In June 2024, Russian warships docked in Havana Harbor, an image that sent a chill through Washington and resurrected Cold War anxieties that most analysts thought were buried. Moscow is not sending ships out of nostalgia. It is signaling that it still has cards to play in America's backyard. China, meanwhile, has been building economic relationships across Latin America for years, and Cuba, desperate for investment, fuel, and food, is not in a position to refuse anyone's attention. The revolution that was born in fierce opposition to foreign dependency is now sustained almost entirely by it. Washington's response to all of this has been characteristically inconsistent. The Obama-era thaw, which briefly opened embassies and eased some travel restrictions, raised hopes on both sides of the Florida Strait that a new chapter was possible. Then came the reversal. Sanctions tightened again, designations were reimposed, and the small Cuban private businesses that had begun to breathe under liberalization found themselves cut off from international banking. Many economists argue that the harshest impact of the embargo falls not on the Cuban government, which has always found ways to survive, but on the Cuban people, who cannot. And yet, loosening the embargo without demanding concrete political changes has always been a difficult argument to make domestically in the United States, where Cuban-American political influence in Florida remains enormous. The result is a policy that satisfies no one and changes nothing. Back in Havana, a mother is rationing cooking oil. A retired teacher is deciding whether to sell her apartment and join her daughter in Tampa. A young man who grew up believing in the revolution is staring at his phone watching a TikTok filmed in Miami. And the dissonance between those two worlds is simply too loud to ignore anymore. The government has responded to the latest economic freefall with the same tools it has always used. Nationalist rhetoric, blame directed at Washington, promises of sacrifice in the service of a future that never quite arrives. But something feels different now. The generation that remembers Batista, that understood viscerally what the revolution was a reaction against, is dying. The generation inheriting the island has no emotional memory of that original hope. They did not feel the electricity of January 1959. They only feel the absence of it, quite literally, every night when the power goes out again. And maybe the real question isn't whether the revolution failed, but whether the people it was meant to protect still believe in it. Because revolutions don't collapse the moment the economy breaks. They begin to unravel when belief fades, when the story no longer matches reality, when the future promised for decades starts to feel further away than ever. And right now, in the silence of those darkened nights, that belief is being tested more than at any other moment in modern Cuban history. So what do you really think is happening here? Did the revolution fail somewhere along the way? Or is this just the next phase of a story that's still unfolding? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see the full picture, the moves no one explains, the signals most people miss, subscribe to Cuba Explained, leave a like, and stay with us. Because what's happening in Cuba right now isn't just a story, it is a shift in history.